In the heart of the city, where glass towers kissed the sky and the streets buzzed with the endless rhythm of life, there was a shadow that few dared to speak of, a shadow that thrived in the corridors of power and whispered secrets behind closed doors. Maya, a young investigative journalist with fiery determination and a restless curiosity, walked briskly through the crowded streets, her notebook clutched tightly in her hands, her eyes scanning faces and buildings for hints of stories that the world was not ready to hear. She had always believed that truth was a weapon stronger than any lie, and that corruption, no matter how deeply buried, could be exposed if one had courage and patience. Her first tip had come from an anonymous email sent late one night. The words were cryptic, but the meaning was clear. Powerful figures were siphoning public funds, and the people were left to struggle while the guilty celebrated their hidden victories. Maya felt a rush of adrenaline mixed with fear. She knew that following this lead could endanger her career and her life, yet the thought of ignoring it was unbearable. She arrived at the cafe where she was supposed to meet an insider, someone who had worked within the government offices for years and had grown tired of watching injustice flourish unchecked. She spotted a man with graying hair and cautious eyes sitting in the corner. He nodded slightly as she approached and whispered, "Do you have the courage to see the truth?" Maya nodded without hesitation and took a seat, her heart pounding with anticipation. He slid a folder across the table, and the weight of it felt heavy, as if it contained the burdens of 1,000 lives. Maya opened it slowly. Photographs, documents, and coded messages spilled out like pieces of a puzzle waiting to be solved. She scanned them quickly, her mind racing with connections and implications. This was bigger than she had imagined. Entire departments were involved. Contracts were being manipulated, bribes were changing hands, and ordinary citizens were paying the price. The man warned her, "Be careful. They watch everyone. They listen to every word, and they will try to silence anyone who threatens their empire." Maya nodded. She understood the danger, yet the fire inside her refused to be extinguished. That night, she returned to her small apartment, the city lights flickering outside her window, casting shadows on the walls. She spread the documents across her desk and began to organize them, the pieces slowly forming a pattern that could expose decades of corruption if only she could prove it convincingly. Every day after that, Maya worked tirelessly, interviewing whistleblowers, reviewing public records, and tracing financial transactions that seemed impossible to follow. She became a shadow herself, moving unnoticed in libraries, government buildings, and online networks, each discovery pushing her closer to a revelation that could shake the foundations of power. But as she dug deeper, she began to notice subtle signs that she was being watched. Strange calls, anonymous messages, and people appearing where they should not have been. The stakes were rising, and the thrill of the chase was intertwined with a gnawing fear. She realized that the closer she got to the truth, the more dangerous the path became. Yet Maya's resolve was unyielding. She reminded herself that corruption thrived on secrecy and silence, and if she could bring the evidence to light, justice might finally prevail. Her first major breakthrough came when she discovered a series of offshore accounts linked to prominent politicians. The trail was complicated and risky to follow, but she could see the flow of money and the manipulation behind closed doors. The files revealed meetings with lobbyists, bribes disguised as donations, and contracts awarded to companies with no experience, yet immense influence. The more she uncovered, the more she understood that this was not just about money, it was about power, control, and the destruction of accountability. Maya felt a mixture of anger and determination as she began to write her first report, every word carefully chosen to expose the truth without endangering her sources or herself. She knew that once published, there would be no turning back, that the world would take notice and those responsible would come after her. But she was ready. The pen in her hand felt like a sword, and the truth was her shield. The night stretched into early morning as she typed tirelessly, her apartment filled with the hum of her computer and the fluttering of her thoughts. She paused occasionally to glance at the photographs of the suffering citizens caught in the web of corruption, their faces a reminder of why she could not falter. Maya understood that this was only the beginning, the first chapter in a battle that would demand courage, sacrifice, and resilience. The world outside continued unaware, the city moving to its own rhythm, but inside Maya's small room, a storm was gathering, one that would not be silenced, one that would confront the powerful and demand accountability. Her journey was just starting, and the path ahead was filled with uncertainty, danger, and relentless pursuit of the hidden truth. She closed her eyes briefly and took a deep breath, knowing that tomorrow would bring new revelations, new challenges, and a deeper understanding of how far corruption could reach and how fiercely it must be fought. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds of Maya's apartment, casting long streaks across the floor, but there was no warmth in the light. Only a sense of urgency as she gathered her notes and photographs, ready to meet her editor at the small newsroom tucked away in a narrow street of the city. She walked briskly, feeling the weight of the folder against her chest, every step a reminder that the path she had chosen was fraught with peril. At the newsroom, she found her editor, Michael, a seasoned journalist with a calm demeanor and sharp eyes. He gestured her over and whispered, "Maya, this story could change everything. You understand the risks, yes?" "I do," she replied firmly, yet her mind raced with the implications. They spent hours reviewing the documents, tracing the money trail, connecting the officials to shell companies and illegal contracts. The evidence was solid, but publishing it meant opening a war with people who had influence over the police, judiciary, and even the media itself. Maya could feel the danger lurking in every corner, as if unseen eyes were following their every move. She decided to start with a smaller piece, an article exposing a single contractor involved in embezzlement, hoping to gauge public reaction and test the waters. But even that small step was met with obstacles: computers mysteriously crashing, phone lines going dead, and anonymous warnings to back off. Maya knew these were signs that the powers she was challenging were aware of her movements. She met with a whistleblower named Arif, a low-level accountant who had secretly documented transactions for years. Arif handed over spreadsheets and internal emails showing a network of bribery that extended to multiple ministries and foreign investors. Maya studied the files carefully, every number and name a thread in a larger web of deceit. They arranged to meet in secret locations, cafes, libraries, and abandoned offices, exchanging information in hushed tones and quick glances. The tension was palpable, yet their determination never wavered. They knew exposure was the only way to stop the destruction of public funds and trust. As Maya pieced together the information, she noticed patterns in the corrupt officials' behavior: frequent late-night meetings, coded language in emails, and transfers timed to coincide with budget approvals. She realized that they were not only stealing money, but manipulating policies to benefit themselves and suppress anyone who questioned their authority. The more she discovered, the deeper the danger became. One evening, as Maya left the newsroom, she felt a presence behind her. Footsteps echoing hers. She quickened her pace, heart hammering in her chest. The streets seemed empty, yet the shadows around her whispered threats. She ducked into a crowded subway and took several trains before reaching her apartment. Her hands shook as she locked the door behind her, realizing that the line between observer and target had vanished. Her apartment was small and sparsely furnished, but tonight it felt like a fortress and a trap at once. She spread the documents on the floor, tracing the connections on a large piece of paper, red strings and sticky notes mapping a network of corruption that was both shocking and terrifying. The files revealed names that once seemed untouchable: politicians with decades of influence, business tycoons, and even officials in law enforcement, all colluding to exploit the citizens. Maya understood that this story was no longer just about corruption, it was about the survival of justice and the courage to confront power.
She began drafting a detailed report, highlighting the embezzlement, bribery, and policy manipulation, every paragraph written to ensure clarity and impact, yet careful to protect her sources and herself. The night was long, and her mind raced with scenarios of retaliation, threats, and smear campaigns, but she pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that silence would allow the corruption to flourish unchecked. Meanwhile, outside the city, lights flickered as if in anticipation, the normal rhythm of life continuing oblivious to the storm brewing in quiet offices and hidden corridors. Within her network, she coordinated with fellow journalists, sharing information, verifying facts, and preparing for a coordinated release of evidence. They knew timing was crucial. One misstep could allow the corrupt to cover their tracks or discredit their findings. The strategy was meticulous, every meeting encrypted, every phone call monitored for safety. The sense of danger was constant, yet Maya could feel the pulse of determination spreading among her team. They were united by a single goal: to expose the truth and give a voice to those silenced by greed and fear. Days passed with careful planning, interviews, and cross-referencing every detail. The tension was almost unbearable, every knock at the door or ring of the phone a potential threat, yet Maya refused to relent. Her editor, Michael, provided guidance, balancing caution with urgency, encouraging her to trust her instincts and the evidence in front of her. The first small article finally went live online, a careful exposure of minor embezzlement, but it caused a ripple. The public responded with outrage and demand for accountability. Comments poured in, calls to the newsroom surged, and a faint tremor of fear seemed to ripple through the offices implicated in the scandal. Maya watched the reactions closely, knowing this was only the beginning, that the larger battle lay ahead. She realized that courage and resilience were her strongest allies, and that every revelation brought both progress and danger. Her determination was unwavering. She understood that the shadows of danger were always present, but the light of truth could illuminate the darkness and inspire others to demand justice. Maya closed her laptop that night feeling both exhausted and empowered, knowing that the fight had just begun and that the road ahead was uncertain, treacherous, and demanding, but filled with the possibility of real change. She glanced at the photographs of citizens whose lives had been affected by corruption, their faces etched in her mind as a reminder of why she could not falter. Maya knew that the coming days would test her in ways she had never imagined, and that every step forward required courage, careful strategy, and unwavering commitment to the truth.
The city felt colder that morning as Maya stepped out of her apartment, shadows stretching across the streets. She kept her head low, clutching the folder tightly, knowing that every step she took was being watched. The events of the past weeks had taught her that even trusted allies could be compromised. Every glance, every whisper could hold danger. She met her editor, Michael, in the back of a quiet cafe, far from the newsroom, to discuss the next phase of the investigation. They reviewed the latest evidence, mapping out connections between officials, corporate executives, and clandestine intermediaries. It was clear that the scale of corruption was unprecedented and the stakes higher than ever before. Yet, as they worked, a subtle unease crept into Maya's mind. She sensed movement in the corners of the room, fleeting glances from strangers who seemed too interested in their discussion. Every instinct told her that someone was following them. The first real betrayal came unexpectedly. Arif, one of her most trusted sources, had been compromised. She received a cryptic message from an unknown number warning her not to trust him anymore. Her heart sank as she realized that someone inside their circle had leaked information to the very people they were trying to expose. The message contained details only someone close could know, confirming her fears. She quickly called Arif, who sounded nervous and evasive, insisting he was still loyal. Yet Maya could hear the tension in his voice. It was clear that trust had been broken and that the network of corruption had eyes inside their own team. She decided to proceed with extreme caution, moving meetings to secure locations, using multiple layers of encryption, and limiting communication to essential channels. Only the most trusted allies were kept fully informed, and even then, their interactions were carefully monitored. Maya knew that the powerful figures she was exposing would use every tactic to intimidate, silence, and discredit her, including threats of violence, sabotage, and legal action. One evening, as she returned to her apartment, she noticed a car parked across the street with tinted windows, the engine running. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She waited until it moved before approaching her door cautiously. Inside, she found her apartment untouched, but the sense of intrusion was undeniable. She quickly relocated the documents to a safe house, a small rented space far from her usual routes. The betrayal and threats were taking a psychological toll, yet Maya refused to be paralyzed by fear. She reminded herself that corruption thrived on silence and hesitation, and that courage was her only weapon. In the following days, she began coordinating with legal experts and cybersecurity specialists to protect herself and her sources. The preparation was meticulous: encrypted backups hidden in multiple locations, safe houses established, and escape plans formulated for worst-case scenarios. Every step was calculated to stay ahead of those who wished to stop her. The investigation itself grew more intense. She discovered that top officials were funneling money through foreign accounts under the guise of charitable projects, while simultaneously suppressing investigative journalism. The patterns were intricate yet undeniable, and every new piece of evidence brought both clarity and danger. She arranged to meet Layla and other insiders in an abandoned warehouse late at night, the air thick with tension as they exchanged documents and corroborated information. The flickering lights of the warehouse cast long shadows on the walls, mirroring the invisible threat that loomed over them all. As they worked, Maya received an anonymous call, a distorted voice warning her to stop digging or face consequences. She remained calm, recording the call and analyzing the details for clues about the caller. Her resolution hardened. She knew that the only way to fight fear was with action and evidence. The betrayal of Arif weighed heavily on her. She realized that she could trust no one completely. Every interaction had to be measured and every detail verified. She redoubled her efforts, double-checking sources, tracing financial trails, and mapping out connections between officials and businesses with painstaking accuracy. The danger became tangible one evening when she narrowly avoided a staged car accident. Someone had tried to force her off the road, yet her quick reflexes saved her. She knew then that the threats were escalating and that the exposure of the full story was imminent. She spent long nights in the safe house reviewing the dossier, finalizing documents, and preparing for publication. Each photograph, financial record, and testimony was cross-checked and verified, the narrative carefully structured to reveal the truth without exposing her sources. Her mind was consumed by the duality of fear and determination. She could feel the weight of the powerful watching her every move, yet the urgency of the mission drove her forward. The network of corruption was more extensive than she had imagined, the tentacles reaching into law enforcement, media corporations, and political offices, a system designed to protect itself at any cost. Maya understood that revealing this would trigger powerful backlash, but the citizens had the right to know, and the truth had to be told. She prepared contingency plans for retaliation, legal challenges, and media manipulation, the safety of her team and herself a constant concern. Yet even as the threat grew, the excitement of unearthing hidden truths fueled her determination. She knew that exposure could lead to arrests, resignations, and systemic reform, and that every risk taken was a step toward justice. As Part 4 drew to a close, Maya stared at the pile of documents in the dim light of the safe house. She felt exhaustion, yet an undeniable sense of purpose. She knew that betrayal and threats were only the beginning, that the final confrontation with the power she was exposing was near, and that courage, vigilance, and resilience would be her only allies in the storm that was coming. The city seemed quieter than usual as Maya moved through the streets, her senses sharpened, every sound and movement analyzed for threats, her heart beating in rhythm with the urgency of the investigation. She carried the folder, filled with evidence, knowing that its contents could change lives, topple careers, and expose a network of corruption that had thrived in darkness for decades. That morning, she met Michael at a discreet location, a small office tucked away in the top floor of an old building. They spread out the documents, photographs, and financial records, reviewing each connection and transaction carefully. The network of corruption was more sophisticated than they had imagined. Every official involved had layers of protection, shell companies, legal loopholes, and loyalists ready to defend them. Yet Maya and Michael were determined to cut through the layers. Their next step was to confront a key insider named Tariq, a mid-level official with access to confidential information about contracts and fund allocations. Tariq had initially approached Maya with hints of corruption, but his motives had been unclear. She arranged a meeting in a secluded park, the air tense with anticipation as she waited. Tariq arrived, nervous and glancing over his shoulder before sitting across from her. He handed over a flash drive containing emails and transaction records. The evidence detailed not only financial embezzlement, but manipulation of policies to benefit private entities at the expense of the public. His hands trembled as he spoke. The consequences of exposure had already begun to manifest. Threats, warnings, and surveillance. They were taking no chances. Maya listened carefully, recording everything, mentally and physically, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to form a clearer picture than ever before. Yet, even as the information flowed, a sense of unease gripped her. She could feel eyes watching from the trees and shadows, the paranoia that had been constant, now almost tangible. She decided to leave the park quickly and head to a safe location to review the files. Tariq warned her, "Do not underestimate them. They will strike before you realize it." Maya nodded, knowing he was right. The safe house became a hive of activity. The documents spread across tables, walls covered with maps, connections, and timelines, detailing the flow of money, decisions, and meetings. Each new discovery added depth and clarity, yet also increased the danger. They were navigating a labyrinth with walls that could crush them at any moment. Maya began drafting the exposé, a detailed account of corruption, bribery, embezzlement, and manipulation. Every word carefully chosen, every fact verified to withstand scrutiny and attack. She understood that publishing this would trigger a storm that could include legal battles, threats against her team, and attempts to discredit her work. The first confrontation came sooner than expected, a late-night phone call with a distorted voice warning her to stop the investigation or face severe consequences. Maya did not falter. She recorded the call and traced its origin as far as possible, realizing that the threats were coming from individuals with significant influence and reach. She knew that the final confrontation was approaching, and that courage, careful strategy, and resilience were her only allies. The following day, a group of masked men attempted to break into the safe house. Maya and Michael were not present, but the intrusion confirmed that their enemies were closing in. The police were slow to respond, and some officers appeared unusually indifferent, reinforcing the extent of the network protecting the corrupt. Maya realized that their safety depended on secrecy, mobility, and vigilance. She relocated the documents and sources to multiple safe houses, creating layers of protection that would make it difficult for anyone to access the evidence. She also began coordinating with national and international media outlets, ensuring that once the story was released, it could not be suppressed. The shocking revelation came when Tariq shared internal recordings of meetings between politicians and corporate executives discussing ways to manipulate budgets, public projects, and media narratives to maintain control and suppress dissent. Maya listened in disbelief. The scale of corruption far greater than she had imagined. Entire departments complicit in schemes that enriched themselves while leaving citizens vulnerable and unheard. Each recording revealed the cold calculation and audacity of those in power, the brazenness with which they exploited trust and manipulated systems. It was both horrifying and empowering, knowing that this information could bring justice if exposed, yet dangerous, knowing the lengths to which the guilty would go to protect themselves. The first version of the report was completed. Maya and Michael reviewed it meticulously, checking every detail, ensuring credibility and safety of sources. They planned a phased release strategy, beginning with minor leaks to gauge reaction, followed by a full publication that would leave no doubt about the evidence. They also prepared for retaliation, legal attacks, and smear campaigns, anticipating every possible counterattack. The city outside continued unaware, yet the tension within Maya and her team was palpable. Every sound, every shadow heightened awareness. The stakes higher than ever before. As Part 5 drew to a close, Maya stared at the dossier, her hands trembling with exhaustion and excitement. She realized that the confrontation with the powers of corruption was imminent, and that the next few days would determine the outcome of months of investigation, courage, determination, and careful planning. The world was about to witness the storm that had been brewing in the shadows, a storm fueled by truth and relentless pursuit of justice. The city awoke to an ordinary morning, unaware that the hidden rot within its corridors of power was about to be exposed. Maya sat in the safe house, her eyes scanning the final draft of the exposé, every word meticulously verified, every source protected. She could feel the tension in her chest, the adrenaline mingled with exhaustion and determination. Today, the world would see the truth, and the consequences would be swift and unpredictable. Michael paced the room, constantly checking messages and coordinating with media outlets to ensure the release was synchronized and secure. The plan was simple in execution, but complex in logistics. Minor leaks had already prepared the public for larger revelations, yet the full dossier would leave no room for denial. The moment of publication arrived. Maya clicked send, and the article went live on multiple platforms simultaneously. Social media exploded. News channels scrambled to cover the story. Comments and shares multiplied exponentially. Ordinary citizens reading the details of embezzlement, bribery, and manipulation they had suspected but never seen in black and white. The impact was immediate. Protests and outrage spread through the city, demanding accountability, resignations, and investigations. The story was undeniable, backed by mountains of evidence meticulously gathered by Maya and her team. Meanwhile, the corrupt officials reacted with fury, threats, and denials issued through media allies. Attempts to discredit the story were swift, but the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, documents, and photographs could not be ignored. Maya expected retaliation, and it came swiftly. Anonymous threats, messages, and shadowy figures appearing near safe houses. The network of corruption striking to intimidate and silence her team. Yet public support acted as a shield. Citizens and activists rallied behind the journalists, spreading awareness and demanding justice, the pressure on officials mounting by the hour. Layla and Tariq came forward, giving public testimony and corroborating evidence, their courage inspiring more insiders to speak out. The tide was turning against those who had long believed themselves untouchable. The legal battles began immediately. Lawyers representing the corrupt sought injunctions and court orders to remove the articles and block publication. But the meticulous documentation and verified evidence made suppression impossible. Every document was cross-referenced, every transaction traced, and every statement corroborated, making the case unassailable. The city became a battlefield of influence, public opinion, and media coverage, with Maya at the center, the invisible target of a network trying desperately to maintain control. She refused to be silenced, navigating threats with careful strategy, moving between safe locations, coordinating with journalists, legal experts, and cybersecurity specialists, every action calculated to protect herself and her sources. The network of corruption that once seemed impenetrable began to crumble. Officials were forced to answer questions, resignations were tendered, investigations launched, and arrests made, the foundations of decades of deceit shaken by the courage of a few individuals determined to expose the truth. Maya watched the unfolding events from a secure location, her heart heavy with the awareness of the risks, but buoyed by the knowledge that justice was beginning to prevail. The psychological toll was immense. Sleepless nights, constant vigilance, and the fear of retribution weighed heavily. Yet the sense of purpose and the tangible impact of her work gave her strength. She realized that the storm was not over, that those who had been exposed would fight back in legal battles, public opinion campaigns, and covert attempts to discredit the movement. Yet the momentum had shifted, the citizens empowered, the media alert, and the truth undeniable. The final phase of the operation involved careful follow-up, interviews with whistleblowers, cross-checking additional documents, and preparing for potential counter-narratives. Maya and Michael coordinated press conferences, carefully scripting statements and ensuring that no detail was left vulnerable to attack. Every move was strategic, every decision critical, as the city reacted with shock, anger, and a growing demand for reform. The exposure sparked nationwide attention, international media highlighting the depth of corruption and the courage of the journalists involved. Maya's story became a symbol of integrity and resilience, inspiring other journalists and citizens to pursue truth and demand accountability. The threats and intimidation attempts continued, yet the sheer scale of public awareness created a protective barrier that even the powerful could not easily dismantle. Maya knew that vigilance would always be necessary, that the fight against corruption was ongoing, yet the publication of the exposé had shifted the balance, the invisible walls of secrecy and power beginning to crumble. She reviewed the dossier one last time, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion and relief, the months of tireless work finally culminating in a tangible impact. The city was alive with reaction, demonstrations, and debates, news channels covering resignations and investigations, the ripple effect growing larger by the hour. Maya allowed herself a brief moment of reflection, knowing that while danger had not vanished, courage, determination, and the relentless pursuit of truth had achieved what many believed impossible. The city slowly stirred in the aftermath of revelations that had shaken its foundations. Maya sat in a quiet safe house, her eyes tracing the pile of documents that had once been the source of fear, now the source of empowerment. Every resignation, every investigation, and every arrest felt like a small victory against a system that had long seemed untouchable. She reflected on the months of tireless work, the long nights, the threats, the betrayals, and the relentless pursuit of truth. The danger had not vanished, the corrupt still lingered in shadows, yet the momentum had shifted in favor of justice. The exposé had inspired other journalists to dig deeper, citizens to question authority, and whistleblowers to step forward. Maya had become a symbol of courage not because she sought recognition, but because she refused to let fear dictate her actions. The courts moved swiftly as the evidence she had gathered was undeniable, judges and investigators poring over the meticulously documented transactions, recordings, and testimonies that left little room for denial. Public hearings were broadcast nationwide, and the officials who had once wielded power without accountability were forced to answer questions under the scrutiny of the citizens and the press. The legal battles were grueling, but the transparency ensured that justice could not be obstructed, and the guilty could not hide. Behind the scenes, Maya continued to protect her sources, coordinating safe houses and encrypted communications, ensuring that no one was endangered by the exposure of sensitive information. She understood that courage alone was not enough. Meticulous planning, vigilance, and resilience were required to navigate the dangers that came with challenging entrenched power. The social impact was profound. Demonstrations erupted, calling for reforms, stricter oversight, and accountability mechanisms. Government agencies began internal reviews. Citizens demanded transparency and ethical governance. The culture of silence and fear slowly beginning to dissolve. Maya met with Layla and Tariq once more, the three of them reflecting on the journey, the risks taken, and the impact of their actions. They spoke quietly about the threats they had faced, the sleepless nights and the moments of doubt, yet their voices carried relief and quiet pride. They knew that their courage had sparked a change that could ripple for years to come. Maya returned to the newsroom one final time, the place where the journey had begun. Her colleagues greeted her with quiet congratulations and respect, the camaraderie forged through months of relentless pursuit stronger than ever. She realized that journalism was not just about reporting, but about accountability, courage, and unwavering commitment to the truth. The city outside was alive with debate, protest, and discussion. Citizens engaged in civic processes more actively than ever before. The culture of fear and apathy that had allowed corruption to thrive was being replaced with vigilance and demand for integrity. Maya understood that the fight against corruption was ongoing, that vigilance must be maintained, and that the responsibility of truth was never ending. Yet, for the first time in months, she allowed herself a sense of relief and accomplishment. She visited families affected by the corruption, sharing updates and hearing their stories of resilience, their gratitude reinforcing the importance of her work. She saw hope in their eyes, a belief that accountability was possible and that ordinary citizens could demand change. Her personal reflection was deep. She had faced threats, intimidation, betrayal, and the weight of responsibility, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined. The journey had taught her that fear could be confronted with courage, that secrecy could be overcome with transparency, and that the truth had power far beyond any single individual. Maya began mentoring young journalists, sharing lessons learned, strategies for investigation, safety, and the importance of integrity. The next generation needed guidance to continue the pursuit of justice. She also documented the entire process in a confidential archive, ensuring that future investigations could benefit from the knowledge and experience gained. Her work sparked nationwide initiatives, civic reforms, and strengthened mechanisms for whistleblower protection and media freedom, ensuring that the exposure of corruption was not an isolated event, but the beginning of systemic change. As the sun set over the city, Maya stood on a rooftop overlooking the streets below, the lights flickering like tiny beacons of hope. She reflected on the journey from discovery to exposure, from fear to empowerment, the path filled with danger, uncertainty, and unwavering pursuit of truth. Her thoughts were of the people she had fought for, the citizens whose lives had been affected by corruption and whose voices had finally been amplified. She realized that her mission had always been bigger than herself, that justice, integrity, and courage were forces that could change the world, even against overwhelming odds. In the quiet of the evening, she allowed herself a deep breath, a moment of peace, and the knowledge that the storm she had faced had been weathered, the fight had not ended, but the foundations for lasting change had been laid. Maya's eyes lifted to the horizon, the city alive with potential and vigilance. She knew that corruption would always exist, yet the courage to expose it would continue to grow. The story that had begun with a single anonymous tip had culminated in accountability, reform, and public awakening, and Maya understood that this was the power of truth and the enduring impact of fearless journalism.